Yes, I'll be recording the conversation, so I just wanted to start with that. Hello and welcome. My name is Ana Barajas, and I'm the director of YYZ Artist Outlet in Toronto. I just wanted to first acknowledge that we're based in Toronto and that we are the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that the City of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. And we are very lucky to be able to work and live on this land. Today we're having a conversation with Susan Rowe Harrison, whose current exhibition at YYZ Weather Report is on view until December 17th. A little bit about Susan. Susan Rowe Harrison utilizes painting, drawing, ceramics, and large-scale site-based works to explore her fascination for natural environments and our relationship to them. She studied painting and drawing at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and she earned an MA in Art Education and Community Practice from New York University. She also did a BA in History of Art from the University of California, Berkeley. And she has shown and is collected internationally, including Hyatt Hotels, Pfizer New York City, Arts Etobicoke, Amnesty International, Auto Shirt for Art on the Move, Floatworks, Relative Space, and Boku, the Gladstone Hotel, Wave Hill, the University of Chicago Committee on Japanese Studies, the Newberry Library, and FIFA World Cup Seoul 2002. Susan currently lives and works in New York, where she is joining us from right now. And she would like to thank the Puffin Foundation for their support for this project. And now I'll let Susan introduce her work.
And also to thank YYZ for giving me the opportunity to, to knock myself out in the Gallery Z space. So I'm going to start here. So I'm so glad to be here, and thanks for coming to this talk. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Ana. So this is figure out how to get this this pop-up off my screen. You can't see the pop-up, can you? No. Okay, so I'll just ignore it. So just in case you haven't seen the show, I'm starting out with an image of my work Weather Report that I did for YYZ. I'm not gonna talk about the project yet. I'm gonna kind of go back. When I first talked to Ana about doing the talk, she kind of mentioned that I should talk about my work in general, and then talk a little bit about Weather Report, and then talk about what I'm working on now. So I'm going to go back to 2002. I have the question, what if you painted on the wall, which is a question that the Jennifer McGregor, the curator at Wave Hill, said to me when she curated my work for this show called Insecta Magnifica back in 2002. I had been doing like these large kind of drawings on the wall, and she just said, we're doing this show, I have this space, what if you painted on the wall? And like I was well aware of contemporary art and worked in contemporary museums, and I don't know why I'd never thought about just like working directly on the wall. And so for me, that was kind of like my first foray into making wall works. And the image on the left is kind of a study that I did for the final painting, which is on on the right. Like in hindsight, I look at the image on the left, and I like it better than what I did for Wave Hill, but like I had to work with the constraints of this kind of oval entrance area with niches on both sides, and so there was, you know, only certain things that would kind of, you know, like work in those niches. So that kind of like also introduced me to the world of architectural nooks and crannies, which is like something I just really love to address in my work. So that's kind of where the installation work started. And this is a work I did. So the question I put was, why don't you try vinyl? And this came from a conversation that I had with a salesperson in an art store. I was picked for Ali John. If you know, you may remember Ali John if you're in Toronto. But it was a show, I think, started by Jen Boltwees. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. And it kind of used garages and alleyways on the west side of Toronto for art exhibits, and it lasted a weekend. So it was like full on, like you just worked super hard and did a, you know, a garage or an installation somewhere, and it was only up for the weekend, but it was great because people knew if they wanted to see the work, they had to come out for, you know, on the weekend, one Saturday or Sunday, to see all the exhibits. And she usually did like a cool map, and it was a really fun event. So this was my first one that I did for Ali John, and it was a fence in the Trinity Bellwoods neighborhood. And I had the idea to do this portion of a poem by Walt Whitman. And because it was in a Portuguese neighborhood, I asked a Portuguese friend to translate the quote for me. And the idea was, because it was on a fence and it was in a laneway, that I wanted to kind of, you know, play around with the idea of the neighborliness of strangers. And so I thought, like, by having the quote in English and Portuguese, I could kind of nod to the neighborhood and also kind of, you know, bring people together. And as I was installing it, I was talking to people about the quote. And, you know, it was sort of like what the quote says about kind of, you know, talking to strangers and, you know, making kind of a neighborhood. It really worked. It was like the energy of the weekend, and then, you know, it was a beautiful sunny day, and then, you know, having this quote, I think it really worked well. But back to the why don't you try vinyl. So my idea for this was that I would cut everything out of paper. And it was kind of like the first time that I had worked with cut paper, cut vinyl for a project. And I got to thinking, you know, it's outside, it's on a fence, like what if it rains? The paper is just going to get destroyed. And so I went to the art store, and I was just kind of like talking to the salesperson and saying, you know, I'm doing this installation, it's outside, I'm trying to figure out a material. And he was like, why don't you try vinyl? And I had never really heard of the material, and I didn't know anything about it. So I bought a roll of it, and I just started cutting it. And I spent hours and hours and hours cutting the vinyl. And I applied like each letter individually. I didn't even know that there was a machine for cutting vinyl. And so I did it all by hand. And it just sort of launched me into, like, I guess 14 or 16 years of working in sign vinyl. So the next one is a piece, I'm skipping over to 2012. It's a piece I did for Stantec and their window gallery. And the gallery is really cool. It's like a kind of fishbowl space. And that's the original entrance to the McGregor stock factory, which is where their offices are. And when they moved the entrance over to the side, I guess so they could have some parking, it left this kind of really strange space on the side. And they decided, Stantec decided to make it a gallery. So you can apply to have your work there. And so when I got picked for it, I really wanted to kind of utilize that fishbowl space. So and I was working with, I did a couple of projects with like bird window collisions. And so the window, I wanted to do kind of something with birds, and then there was the back wall. And so I kind of wanted to play around with that depth. So I ended up putting the gold orb on the back wall. This is an image from a junk shop in Omaha that kind of gave me the idea for the installation. It was this kind of crazy metal welded sculpture of kind of, I don't think it was meant to be bird vertebrae, but that's what it looked like to me. And so I just took a really blurry photo, and I wanted to kind of play around with the chaos of flying birds and window collisions. And so I started kind of playing around with that in Photoshop to kind of come up with my concept for the windows and get a sense of how it might look. And then I wanted to play around with another color because I thought the white was kind of too, it didn't like have enough depth to it. And then I wanted to also play around with that fishbowl space. So I started cutting away some of the vinyl, or in Photoshop, I was just kind of erasing it. And these next images are kind of some process images of me cutting the vinyl. After I come up with the concept, I hand draw everything on the vinyl, and then I hand cut it. I eventually bought a plotter cutter, but I don't use it. I have used it, but I just feel like it smooths everything out. And I like the elements of chance and kind of the mistakes that happen, when you're applying stuff to the window, like, or the wall, however frustrating it is, like when the vinyl doesn't work or it rips, or, you have to kind of just react to that. And I always find that the end product is much more, it feels more natural to me, which is always something that I'm aiming for. And then the next slide is kind of the next image is a bad image in that fishbowl space. So you can kind of get a sense of how tight it is. And so I applied the vinyl on the inside window, and then on the back wall, which is behind that ladder. And then the last image is just the cut vinyl on my work table. Now I'm skipping over to 2017. This is a commission I did for LinkedIn. It's in their cafe in the Empire State Building. And I worked with the LinkedIn designers and also Gensler architects on kind of like refining the design and choosing the paint colors that would kind of work with their design. And they really wanted it to be on all the walls. I think the walls are like, they're like 24 feet wide.
When she stop talking, maybe she'll become big. When she's
There you go. I just muted them. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it's like 48 feet wide, and I think maybe like 12 feet high. And this one is paint. Sometimes, I'll do a mural in paint, or if the project, I think, paint is the right material for it, then I'll switch over to paint. And I don't know why it's not, okay. So, and the next image is, for this project, I did the concept drawings in Illustrator instead of Photoshop, and you can kind of see the grid. So I tried to use a projector, but I couldn't because of the light in the space and there were no curtains. So I just did it old school, and I built a grid and painter's tape on the wall and then just drew everything out. The middle photo is just, and the ladder's kind of showing painting over doors. They gave me like free reign to paint over doors and paint around pipes, and they just kind of wanted it to be floor to ceiling. And so I was like back to my nooks and crannies. So, and then the next one is just another process photo of the work. And then this is 2021. So I'm back at Wave Hill, like, I guess like 2002, 2021, almost like 20 years later. So this was also a show that Jennifer McGregor curated, and she curated the show, but then the pandemic hit, and so I think we had to wait a year and a half before the show happened. They did a web-based show, and I did a walk for them in my local nature preserve. That's on my website if you're interested in seeing it. And they had like a nature walk in a park in Brooklyn, and I think they had a foraging walk. That they're all pretty cool. Like, I think you can find them through Eco Urgency. You can probably find them on the Wave Hill website, but also on YouTube. And this is another project that kind of deals with the environment. The windows are kind of back to my bird window collision theme. And then the wall part of it is an invasive plant. And so it's kind of looking at how invasive species are really damaging for the environment. And even New York State has a mandate that if you find invasive plants, you need to like surround them in plastic so none of their seeds fall to the ground, and like you wrap them up and you contact the state environmental department, just to make sure that they don't spread, because if they do, there's this plant in particular grows like up to, I think, like 20 feet high, and so it starts shadowing all the other plants, and so it kind of sets up a kind of like botanical competition. So the lower plants can't get the light that they need to grow, and so it's really creates a vicious cycle. So I wanted to kind of play with that kind of the dangerous edge of invasive species while also the beauty of them. And so this is the next slide is the importance of wasting time. So this one is like a little stop motion video I made when I was cutting the project for Wave Hill, which I didn't have time to make, but a friend was following me on Instagram and kind of seeing all the pieces and saying, oh, I could see that as a stop motion. So I took her up on the challenge and decided to make a little stop motion video. And I'll let you watch it, and then so there's like an expression in French where it's kind of says that wasting time is saving time. And so I say the importance of wasting time only because I made, while I was making the stop motion, it kind of helped me figure out the placement of all these little bits that I was cutting out for the installation. And so you can see in the last image kind of what I came up with. And so the making the stop motion, like I didn't really have time to kind of tackle stop motion. I should have been like cutting. It would have been less stressful overall, but it really did help me kind of figure out how I was going to place things on the wall. So the first image is my concept drawing, and then I ended up kind of cutting up the drawing on a little light table because I was trying to kind of conceptualize how to break apart the plant so I could apply it in pieces on the wall. And like the sign vinyl is sticky, so it gets, the larger it gets, the more unwieldy it gets. So I had to think kind of strategically about how to cut it out so that, you know, I didn't have a lot of struggle putting it together. And then the middle piece is just my cutting out the parts of the, this is actually Mylar, and then the color in the window is dichroic vinyl. So that's the only part that's the sign vinyl. Oops, I didn't mean to do that again. And so here's just a few more images of the installation process. So I'd already done the window, the Mylar, and then I'm applying the vinyl to the wall and then the underside of the staircase. And then the middle image is my kind of placing the Mylar, and then I went in with a kind of double stick adhesive to hold the Mylar to the windows. And then the last one is just the magic that happens with the dichroic vinyl, sunlight, and a window. This is like at certain times of day, where, you know, depending on where the sun was, it would just cut through the Mylar and the dichroic vinyl and cast amazing shadows on the stairs. And every time I use a material, it's just always something different. And so it kind of creates like a third installation that's a collaboration between the light and the cut materials, the vinyl and the Mylar. And so now I'm going to wrap back around to Weather Report, which is the show or the piece that I did for YYZ. And so I just wanted to bring it back to drawing and painting, and nature. Drawing and painting is really, or drawing is really the thread that runs through all of my work. And so when I started to kind of think about what I wanted to do with Weather Report, I was like on the tail end of the Eco Urgency show. And so I was really thinking about the environment, and there were, you know, watching the news, there were wildfires and storms, and, you know, like the weather was getting so crazy. And, you know, so I felt like I couldn't leave that idea behind. So I continued working with like kind of plant forms, and I just, you know, I just went back to basics, and I just went into the studio and started drawing from plants. And I'm not sure that this, like, you know, looks like anything that I did in Weather Report, but I really wanted to do drawing also to kind of get a sense of the kind of curves of the plants and how they move. And that's really important to me for them to look natural. So even though they're kind of like silhouettes and very graphic, it's really important to me that they have a kind of feeling of nature to them. So the drawing aspect of that was like just to get, you know, I'd done a lot of reading and thinking and research, and I was using that kind of cognitive part of my brain, and I really needed to go and work on the plastic part of my brain. So doing these drawings really helped with that. And at the same time, we couldn't live in our house. So we were like moving around. We were in the city and we're upstate. So I would take these walks, and just kind of photograph plants that I would see. And I really wanted to get a sense of movement and also like clustering, like how leaves on plants naturally cluster, and when they kind of start to die, like how they what ends up on the stem, like, and what's like the natural bend of the weight of a plant. Like I wanted to have a real sense of that to bring to the installation. And so then from there, I started to work on a maquette. Normally, I showed you images before where I was like working in Photoshop or Illustrator, and I do just old-fashioned graphite drawings. And I felt like, because I knew I wanted to utilize the entire gallery space, and really, I felt like I just hadn't stretched in an installation and I had a lot of time. So I felt like this was an opportunity really to kind of stretch and really use the space. I thought the best way to do that would be to build a scale model. And so I did that, and I started cutting out scraps of vinyl I had and starting to plan the colors and, kind of what I wanted how I wanted the room to look. And so I created this maquette, and I thought I really love the idea of reflecting pools. And, when you see something reflected on water, there's like just something so magical about that. And it also creates another world. And in this installation, because it's a room and I knew that people would be walking into the room, having a reflection would also kind of implicate the viewer in the artwork. And so this environment would, you would be within it. You wouldn't just be looking at it, you would be in it. And using that kind of reflective surface would do that, at least in my mind, or in my imagination. That's what I was thinking. So when I did the model, I found this book in a secondhand shop on using mirrors. I think it was like from the 70s. And so I discovered that there were all sorts of kind of mirrors, like mirrored mylar and kind of plexiglass mirror. And so mylar kind of fit the bill because it was like light, it was portable, it wasn't super expensive, and it wouldn't break. So it was like really the right material. And the sort of like beauty and misery of doing a scale model is that it's airtight. So when I did the maquette, like I really had the idea of doing the entire floor with mirror. And for the maquette, it was amazing. Like I thought it looked so good. But then when I saw the space, I realized that the ceiling would be reflected in the floor, and I wanted people to enter the room, and I thought the mylar is not thick enough for people to walk on it, and it would scratch. And so in the end, we decided to just do the mylar at the edge of the installation. But one day, if I get funding, I'll do some kind of mirrored material that you can walk on, because it was just so fun to play around with the reflections. And then it also gives you that like additional resource to create meaning. So in the next image, this is just building it, going from the maquette to large scale in my tiny studio. I think the next one shows a grid. So I kind of did a grid on my phone to kind of get a sense of like how to take the small scale from the maquette to the large scale on the wall. And so this is kind of like how my process is that I draw it out and then I cut it and then I put it on the wall and I kind of figure out where it's going to go. But then I take it to the location and then I have to do the whole thing all over. But I get a sense of like how it works and where things are going to go. So that's like some of the elements of chance that, even though it's like way more work, I really like that process of change to the piece. And if I had it, you know, cut by machine and all laid out, it would be so much easier to apply it to the wall. But I think in the end, it wouldn't have the same feeling. And then this slide is just to say you can work big in a small studio. So if anyone's out there who has a small studio, just know that, you know, don't let that hold you back from working large. You just have to use every bit of space, and you have to like keep moving things around. And in the next slide, finding a wall big enough was my issue in my basement. But the weird thing is when I got to YYZ and started applying the pieces to the wall, this piece that looks so huge was actually looks pretty small at YYZ. So, you know, it's really fun to play around with scale in that way, or see how different a space can make things. And this is just a little experiment in my studio with the mirrored mylar. I was kind of playing around with it with the light reflections, and I was really pleased when I saw this because I really wanted that kind of like shimmering that you get from light on water. And I was just really happy that the mylar worked. Sometimes it's a leap of faith with trying new materials. This is me setting up in YYZ, and I use projections to kind of place things just to get the angles right. And then, but it wasn't like big enough on the wall, so I kept having to move the projector around. And then I put artists on ladders because for some reason people love to see artists on ladders. So there's an artist on ladders image. And this is the other wall on the other side of the image that I showed at the start. And this is where the cycle ends or begins or ends. The space was meant to be a cycle. So I was trying to look at how to depict climate change. And so originally I thought I would start with the kind of the scene being kind of super lush, and then the middle scene was kind of like an unexpected outcome of these plants that the seeds were buried for 100 years and no one had seen the plants. And then when they were excavating in the area in the Don Valley, these plants sprouted, and you know, they were, you know, overjoyed to have these plants back again. So that was like the sort of unexpected consequence that we just don't know what's going to happen in the environment, for, you know, better or for worse. And then the kind of scenes moved around to the kind of, I don't know, beige on the white walls. And that was like, in my mind, it was like when everything dried up and died. And when I was talking to someone at the walkthrough in November, he was sort of saying, well, it could be winter, or, you know, so this is where it could be the end, or it could also be the beginning of a new cycle. And so it's sort of like that open interpretation. And the last, and this is what I'm working on now. I just got back from a 3-week residency in Barcelona. And after doing like such a huge installation, that is super physical to install because I work on my own. I wanted to just go back to basics and just work on a bunch of, really small drawings. And these drawings are, I think there's about 19 that I got done in the 3-week period. The drawings are 1 by 3 inches, and this is a close-up of one of them. And then that's another one. That's one that I did in New York, and that's one that I did in Barcelona. The idea was kind of like to look at urban nature in Barcelona, but it sort of changed when I was there. And there's a pencil for scale. And I was watching Stan Brackage's Moth Light. It was an experimental film that he did. He couldn't afford to buy like film and materials, and so he just kind of made like this film strip thing with bits of foliage and moth wings and just bits of nature that he picked up that he put on this film and created this amazing experimental film called Moth Light. And it just was like so tactile. And as I was watching it, I was kind of making these drawings. I was thinking, how they were the drawings were kind of like blending. He was kind of using kind of drawing and painting techniques on his video. And as I was doing the series, I was thinking that they were sort of like frames of a film. So the plan is to keep working on these drawings, and I think I'll go back to that, and then just do like a huge installation of them. So they're 19 now. I just want to keep doing them because I think in doing that I can really get somewhere with them, and do an installation of all of them in separate frames. And then these are some larger drawings that I worked on that strangely kind of look like some of my installation work. So I kind of feel like the vinyl and the drawing and the painting are kind of all starting to come together after doing this work for 20 plus years, which is it's actually kind of a cool thing. I felt like I was trying to do that for so long. Once I got past the novelty of, cutting things in vinyl and kind of understanding how that worked. So that's all I have. And thank you for listening. And thank you, YYZ and Ana, for all the support. I really appreciate the opportunities, and stay in touch. There's my email, my website, my Instagram, and I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Susan. I don't know if there's any questions from the folks here on the Zoom. If you do have a question, you can either put it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask it. Yeah, I think one of the fun things about working at YYZ is that we really give the artists or the space to create site-specific works that kind of help the practice move forward, and we don't put any constraints on what they show for the most part, and we just just give them permission to do what they want to with the space. So it's always a surprise when artists arrive to install what's gonna happen, really. And you showed up in your car with all the vinyl cut in your trunk.
plastic bags.
So to go from that to seeing the work installed, it's really, really amazing. And so it's surprising for us, like in a good way, to see it realized. And I hope that the work that you did kind of informs your practice or what you do next in some way, and that the sort of the opportunity to experiment either in scale or with the concepts or with constraints that the space puts, that sort of helps your practice in some way. I mean, that is sort of our ultimate goal, to assist practice to move forward. So it's great to see like the change in scale from your work at what I said to the smaller drawings, the 1x3. I didn't know they were that small. I mean, they're pretty small to what you were doing in Barcelona. So how do you like switch your brain from like working such a large scale to now working with 1x3?
So I feel like that was really like more of a psychic need. Like it takes like a lot of energy to kind of work large and sustain that, because I don't have an assistant, so I'm on ladders all the time, and I'm like taping stuff up, and it's sticky, and like sometimes it's like super frustrating. And so I think I felt like I just wanted to do something that wasn't physical that way. So and also it was just the fact that I couldn't bring a lot of materials with me. I just could bring my suitcase, and so bringing pencils and paper seemed like a great place to start. And those drawings, it kind of started as I teach a drawing class, and I kind of came up with the exercise for my students to do. Like, I made it really small so they could do it fairly quickly, and they didn't really get hung up on details. And so the exercise was just to do like use 3 lines and tone to try to create like a composition. And when they were working on theirs, I started doing them, and I was having so much fun, and I just found like that. So I just kind of like did those, and I put them aside. I think maybe I had done like 4 or 5. And so I thought, well, I tucked those in my suitcase thinking, oh, maybe I'll go back to those. And then it kind of like, I talked to a gallery owner, and I was looking at the paintings that were in the gallery, and he had mentioned Stan Brakhage, and I had heard of him, but I didn't really know that well his work. And so I just kind of, Googling him, and I read about mothlight, and I was like, oh, that's kind of right in my wheelhouse. Is kind of like plants and insects and like kind of painterly techniques. And so I started watching that as when I was drawing, and I was kind of like, it all kind of came together. So I don't think I had to do like a lot of like consciously switching my brain. I think it was just like a welcome change from the physicality of doing large work, which I really love. And I think like even my small drawings, I think they kind of have whole worlds in them. So maybe they're, I think scale is kind of like a really interesting thing for me, like to kind of play around with. Like YYZ gave me the opportunity to kind of play around with the scale of plants and the human scale, and kind of make us really small in the environment of the installation. And so scale is something also that I like to play with. So I think I didn't like consciously have to think about it so much, as it was just like a confluence of you know, coming off the installation and looking at mock light and having, you know, tucking these drawings I had done in class with, you know, just putting that in my suitcase, and then just, you know, like there's a feeling when you just, your first day at a residency and you're just like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? And so that's just where I started. And yeah.
And now, I know a little bit about Stan Brakhage. I used to work at the CFMDC, which distributes his work here in Canada, which is similar to another, I believe they're in New York, that distributes Filmmakers Co-op. They
Okay.
distribute his work. And one of my favorite sort of films that he did, or I think more the concept of it is like he was at the end of his life and he was bedridden, and he was still really like craving to make work, and he got some black leader, and it's called the films are called Chinese series because they look like Chinese characters, but really what he did was like scratch off the black plastic off the black film with his nails to create this, or you know, once it's projected and running, it's all these like white characters like moving. So this idea that, you know, you're working with what you have, which at that point in his life it was like his body, you know, just and it's still making gestures and creating something that he loved, you know, out of this sort of need. So not a lot of people reference Stan Brakhage, so it's interesting that, you know, you're looking at his work now to sort of reference in your work. Anyways, if you're ever able to see that film series, that's really nice.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah. Another question I had about your practice is like, if when, you know, you're interested in environmental issues and nature, but you're also using like man-made materials that perhaps are, you know, the production of those materials are not exactly the friendliest to the environment. So how do you reconcile
that?
Having to not, you know, using the materials that are available to you now, with sort of the ideas behind, you know, what you want to sort of talk about in the work?
So I knew I was going to get that question. And
do you get that question often?
I've gotten it like once or twice. And I do think about it because vinyl's a petroleum product. It's it's a plastic basically. You know, and I don't think I've reconciled it. It's just it's a material that I love to use, and I feel like plastic is not going to go away. I mean,
that's true.
We use it like medically, you know, like if you have like a heart transplant or a stent or something, like, you know, there are plastic tubes when you get an IV, and you know, like they it's just it's so complicated like that. That's where sometimes I find it really difficult to make art about issues, is that it's just, you're only gonna touch just one facet of the issue. You can never really tell a complete story. I felt like that with this project, and then I felt like, you know, it could be at odds with in the end you have to stop somewhere with a work. But yeah, no, I haven't reconciled it. Like I thought like I could use paper and wheat paste or something, you know, like that, but then it wouldn't, you know, it wouldn't have the color. If I wanted the color, you know, I've tried natural paints that are made from earth, but I love the colors, but you know, maybe I just need to push it farther, but sometimes I just want like a really strong color, and that I can't get really with natural pigments. And I
Yeah.
also don't, you know, that's another complication where I don't think I could like if I start making my own pigments, then I'm making my own pigments, and I'm not creating the work. I'm trying to think of his name. He has like an amazing book. He runs the Toronto Ink Company, and he has
Oh,
an
yeah.
amazing book on making natural inks, and he gets like really stunning colors. But you know, it's paint, so I'd have to kind of develop another process, which maybe, you know, I feel like there's so much about things that we use that we can't resolve, that I guess the only way to be really environmentally sound is like, you know, like maybe not to make it or, you know, to do it. I mean, even using your computer is, you know, you're using energy to,
Yeah.
I don't know how to I don't know how to reconcile it. I do think about it, and I do think every time I buy a roll of vinyl, like even this vinyl was more expensive because I ordered it when there was kind of the oil crisis, and you know, so everything was like a lot more expensive, and I was thinking, oh, you know, this is just a petroleum product, so you know, it's a lot more expensive than I remember it being. So yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll just go to graphite and paper, but you know, I don't know how production is. I don't know how to reconcile it.
Yeah.
But it is like it is a great question. Like even acrylic paint is kind of
Yeah.
like a plastic, so you know.
Yeah. I just wanted to put it out there. It's not for me to say how you should reconcile, if you should reconcile at all. It's just, you know, it's just a question, really.
It is definitely something, you know, something that we have to consider. But I don't know, you know, if we make enough art to really, you know, I think I'm sort of, and I don't mean this to say that we don't have responsibility, because I really think that, you know, we do, we have to learn to consider ourselves as part of the environment, and that anything that we do to the environment that's bad, we're, you know, we're doing that to, you know, to ourselves, because we are the environment. But I think that what is done on a large scale really has more effect than what each individual person can do. Like you could do everything in the most environmentally friendly way on your, you know, own small scale at home, and it wouldn't even have a dent.
Yeah.
And things are happening in, you know, in the earth that we may not even know about, and so, you know, we can't control things that, you know, the earth is kind of brewing and stewing. So yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there's any other questions. Yeah, I just want to say that every time people walk into the space, like the response is always like one of awe. It's like, I think it's beautiful, is to look at, is like really like it kind of wraps you around when you're in that space, and I think people really feel that sort of warmth, or when they're in the space, and they really react very positively to it. So thank you so much for bringing it to the space.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for saying that. Like, you know, it's what every artist hopes for. Yes, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm so glad to show it YYZ and back in Toronto, and yeah.
So if you haven't had the time to see the show, it's up until December 17, Saturday. We're there Wednesdays to Saturdays, noon to 5. So hopefully you have time to come see it. Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for being with us today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.